I stood in the pouring rain, watching my sisters toast through the window of the mansion I spent 20 years maintaining. They called me a charity case, and threw my belongings into the mud, convinced they had finally secured the $50 million inheritance. But as the gates locked behind me, I reached into my pocket and felt the cold steel of the master key my father gave me on his deathbed. The one he told me never to use unless I was cast into the darkness. They think they won the house, but they don't realize I already own the land it sits on. Why did my mother refuse to look at me? What is hidden in the safe deposit box that requires my thumbprint and no one else's? Stay tuned, because the dinner was just the appetizer, and I'm about to serve the main course. The atmosphere in the dining room was thick with the scent of roasted lamb and old, festering resentment. I sat at the foot of the table, my hands trembling slightly as I smoothed the silk of my dress, a dress Monica had already mocked as last season. For 2 decades, I was the daughter who stayed behind, the one who changed our father's 4 bags and managed the chaotic books of the family shipping empire, while my sisters lived like royalty in Paris and Milan. Now, only 3 days after his funeral, the air felt predatory. Monica leaned forward, her diamonds catching the light of the chandelier father bought for me. "Elena, let's be honest," she started, her voice a sharp blade wrapped in velvet. "You've played the role of the martyr beautifully, but you're an employee, not an heir, and tonight, your employment is officially terminated." I looked at my mother, the woman I had protected from father's outbursts for years, but she just continued cutting her meat as if I were invisible. The silence was louder than any scream, and as Monica slid a severance check across the table for a measly $10,000, I realized this wasn't just a dinner, it was an execution. I didn't reach for the check, I reached for my dignity, standing so abruptly that my wine glass toppled, staining the white linen like a fresh wound. "I gave my life to this family," I whispered, my voice cracking before I hardened it into a shield. Sheila, the youngest and most vicious, let out a dry, hacking laugh that made my stomach turn. "You gave your life because you had nowhere else to go, Elena. You were always the help with a shared last name, and now that Dad is gone, we're cleaning house." She stood up, grabbed my designer coat, the one father bought me for my 40th birthday, and threw it toward the door. The disrespect was so calculated, so cold, that I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm breaks. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking a funeral march on the marble, but as I grabbed the handle, I saw a black car pulling into the driveway with plates I didn't recognize. The rain began to fall as I was shoved out onto the porch, the heavy oak doors slamming shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. I stood there for a moment, the cold water soaking through my clothes, listening to the sound of their laughter and the clink of crystal glasses celebrating my exile. They thought I was broken, a discarded piece of trash on the sprawling estate I had kept running through 3 recessions and a dozen lawsuits. But my father wasn't just a businessman. He was a man of secrets, and he knew his other daughters better than they knew themselves. In the dark of the garden, I pulled out my phone, my fingers wet and shaking, and dialed the number written on the back of the photograph I'd found in his desk. A voice answered on the first ring, a voice that sounded like old money and older grudges. "It's time," the voice said. "The courier has just arrived with the first set of documents." I watched from the shadows of the weeping willow as a man in a gray suit stepped out of the black car, and was greeted by Monica at the front door. She looked triumphant, clutching a folder that she believed contained the final deed to the family holdings. I knew that folder. It was a decoy I had helped my father prepare months ago when he realized his health was failing and his daughters were circling like sharks. My heart raced as I moved toward the back of the estate, toward the old carriage house where I had kept a private office hidden from their prying eyes. Every step was a memory of a slap, a snub, or a hidden tear, fueling a fire in my chest that the rain couldn't extinguish. I reached the keypad, entered a code that only I knew, and the heavy iron door groaned open to reveal a wall of monitors. I wasn't just the caregiver. I was the architect of the entire security network, and I was about to watch them walk right into the trap. The first discovery, As the monitors flickered to life, I didn't see the lawyer opening a will. I saw him opening a forensic audit report that I had personally leaked to the authorities. But then, the screen showing the master bedroom caught my eye, and my blood turned to ice. My mother wasn't mourning. She was frantically tearing up the floorboards, pulling out stacks of cash and passports with names I had never heard before. She wasn't the victim of my father's temper. She was the one who had been poisoning him slowly for years to get to his offshore accounts. I gasped, leaning against the cold brick wall, realizing that the betrayal went deeper than just sibling rivalry. My own mother had murdered the only man who ever truly loved me, and she was planning to frame me for the financial discrepancies. Just then, a light flickered on in the carriage house behind me, and a shadow stretched across the floor. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs, expecting to see one of the security guards my sisters had hired to keep me out. Instead, I saw Marcus, my father's longtime chauffeur, and the only person I ever trusted in this den of snakes. He held a silencer-equipped pistol, but he wasn't pointing it at me. He was pointing it at the door. "They're coming, Elena," he said, his voice a low growl of urgency. "The lawyer inside isn't a lawyer. He's a liquidator for the cartel your mother has been laundering money for." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the pieces of the puzzle began to click into a terrifying new shape. This wasn't just about a family business. It was about a criminal empire that had been growing like a cancer under the cover of our legitimate shipping company. Marcus grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a hidden hatch in the floor that led to the old tunnels beneath the estate. As we descended, I heard the sound of glass shattering in the main house, followed by a scream that sounded like Monica. The tunnels were damp and smelled of earth and old secrets, lit only by the weak beam of Marcus's flashlight. He explained as we moved that my father had discovered the laundering a year ago, and had spent his final months moving assets into a blind trust in my name to protect the legitimate side of the legacy. My sisters were nothing but pawns, useful idiots who provided the distraction while my mother handled the real business, with her associates in the city. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. I had spent my life serving people who were fundamentally evil. People who saw me as nothing more than a convenient scapegoat. "Where are we going?" I hissed, tripping over a loose stone as the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance above us. Marcus didn't answer until we reached a heavy steel door at the end of the tunnel that required a biometric scan. "To the only place they can't touch you," he said. "The vault where your father kept the proof of who you really are." The door hissed open, revealing a room filled with filing cabinets and a single, ornate desk with a laptop waiting in the center. Marcus stood by the door, his eyes fixed on the security monitors that showed the mansion being swarmed by men in tactical gear. Not police, but private mercenaries. I sat at the desk, my hands hovering over the keyboard, realizing that I held the power to either vanish forever or burn the entire family legacy to the ground. My sisters were on the screen, huddled in the corner of the dining room, their faces pale with a terror they had never known. Monica looked toward the camera, as if she knew I was watching, her lips moving in a silent plea for help. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly smothered by the memory of her throwing my coat into the mud just an hour ago. I opened the laptop, and a video file began to play automatically. A message from my father, recorded just days before his illness took him. In the video, my father looked frail, but his eyes were sharp, burning with a fierce intensity that I remembered from my childhood. "Elena, if you're seeing this, then the dinner has happened and the wolves have bared their teeth," he said, his voice a ghostly echo in the small room. He revealed that he had known about the poison and the laundering, and that he had stayed alive just long enough to ensure I had everything I needed to destroy them. He told me that my mother wasn't just a criminal. She wasn't my biological mother at all, but a woman hired to play the role after my real mother died in a car accident, that he now believed was an assassination. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me, my entire identity dissolving into a series of lies and corporate maneuvers. "The true inheritance isn't the money, Elena," he whispered in the recording. "It's the ledger in the top drawer. It contains the names of every politician and judge they've bought." I reached for the drawer, my breath hitching in my throat as I saw a flash of red on the monitor. The devastating betrayal. I pulled out the ledger, but as I turned to show Marcus, I found the barrel of his gun pressed directly against my forehead. The man who had been my father's loyal shadow for 30 years had a look of cold, professional detachment on his face. "I'm sorry, Elena," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth it had held moments ago. "But your father was a fool to think I wouldn't take a better offer." He reached for the ledger with his free hand, and I realized with a sickening jolt that Marcus was the one who had been reporting back to the cartel all along. He was the reason the car accident happened, and he was the reason my father's illness had progressed so quickly. He wasn't saving me. He was using me to find the one piece of evidence that could bring down his real employers. Just as he went to pull the trigger, the entire carriage house above us exploded, the shockwave throwing us both to the ground. The room was filled with dust and the smell of ozone as I scrambled toward the laptop, my ears ringing and my vision blurred. Marcus was pinned under a fallen support beam, his legs crushed and his gun skittering across the floor out of reach. I didn't help him. I didn't even look at him as I grabbed the ledger and the laptop, my survival instincts taking over. Above us, the sounds of gunfire and shouting intensified, a war zone erupting on the estate I had once called a sanctuary. I found a secondary exit, a narrow crawl space that led toward the old well at the edge of the property, my heart screaming at me to run and never look back. As I emerged into the night air, the mansion was a towering inferno, the orange flames licking at the dark sky like the tongues of demons. I saw my sisters being dragged toward the black SUVs, their screams lost in the roar of the fire, while my mother stood by the lead vehicle, talking calmly to a man in a tailored suit. I stayed low in the tall grass, watching as the man in the suit handed my mother a suitcase, the payment for her betrayal and the finality of our family's destruction. They thought I was dead, buried in the rubble of the carriage house with the evidence they so desperately wanted to disappear. I felt a cold, hard resolve settle over me. A transformation that turned the grieving daughter into a silent executioner. I didn't need a gun. I had the names, the bank accounts, and the digital keys to every single asset the cartel owned. I pulled out my phone and sent a single encrypted message to a contact my father had hidden in his emergency contacts, a high-ranking agent at Interpol. "The ledger is secure," I typed. "Start the raids." Within seconds, the sky was filled with the thrum of heavy-duty helicopters, their searchlights cutting through the smoke like the eyes of God. The scene below turned into absolute chaos as the Interpol team descended on the estate, flashbangs illuminating the yard in blinding bursts of white. My mother tried to run toward the woods, but she was tackled and handcuffed before she could take 10 steps, her screams of protest ignored by the stone-faced agents. Monica and Sheila were thrown into the back of a transport van, their faces streaked with soot and tears, finally realizing that their greed had led them into a cage. I watched from the darkness, a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life, feeling no joy, only a grim sense of justice. The man in the suit, the leader of the operation, looked directly toward my hiding spot for a split second, as if he could sense my presence. I gripped the ledger tighter, knowing that my work wasn't done until every name in that book was behind bars. Hours later, as the sun began to peek over the horizon, I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket wrapped around my shoulders. An agent approached me, his expression a mix of respect and wariness, and handed me a small, sealed envelope found in my mother's private safe. "You might want to see this, Ms. Elena," he said softly. "It was marked with your name and today's date." I opened it with trembling fingers, expecting another threat or another lie from the woman who had pretended to be my mother. Inside was a single Polaroid of me as a baby, held by a woman who looked exactly like me, and on the back was a message in my father's handwriting. "She didn't die in the accident, Elena. She's waiting for you in Zurich." My heart stopped, the world around me fading into a blur as the implications of his words shattered my remaining reality. I looked at the agent, but before I could speak, my phone vibrated with a call from an unknown international number. I answered it, my voice a mere whisper, and a woman's voice, melodic, familiar, and filled with a strange power, spoke my name. "You did well, Elena," she said. "But the ledger you gave them is a fake. The real one is in the locket you're wearing." I looked down at the gold locket I had worn since I was 5, the one I thought was empty, and realized it had a hidden compartment I had never noticed. The woman continued, "I am the one who built that empire, not your father. And now that the family is out of the way, we can finally begin the real work." She hung up, leaving me standing in the ashes of my old life with a secret that threatened to destroy the world I had just saved. Who was the woman on the phone, and why did she sound like she was standing right behind me?